Hello and welcome to Scott Rock.
We're your hosts from Climb Scotland, Robert Mackenzie.
And me, Calum McBain, catch up with climbers every 2 weeks who have different epic tales to tell us.
We hope you enjoy the show.
And remember, when you're out climbing, be safe and do your buddy checks.
Welcome back to Scott Rock, and today we have a real legend back on the podcast, back once again like the Renegade Master. Someone who I think doesn't get anywhere near enough recognition for all the work that he's done for us all, and all the change that he has made happen, that every single climber, mountaineer, hill walker in Scotland has benefited from. Yes, I am talking about Mountaineering Scotland's very own Kevin Howett. Now, Kevin has been with us for 35 years, but he is now hanging it up and retiring. But before he goes, he is here to give us a history lesson. For those of you that don't know, myself and Calum both work for Mountaineering Scotland, and they have very kindly allowed us to run this podcast through our positions. Mountaineering Scotland is the only recognised representative body for hill walkers, climbers, mountaineers, ski tourers who live in Scotland or who enjoy Scotland's mountains, and they act as the representative body to support and promote Scottish mountaineering. But what started as a passionate team of volunteers, Mountaineering Scotland has been going for 50 years now, over 50 years now, and Kevin Howett was the first paid member, and he has been with us for 35 of those years. In this interview, Kevin takes us back to the beginnings of his career and gives us an insight into the major work that Mountaineering Scotland has been involved in over the last 3 decades and that he has kind of been crucial in. Kevin gives his own personal perspective on all of the work that he's been involved with and how the organisation has evolved over that time. From access to our most beloved areas to climbing developments in both indoors and out, it is incredible how much work he has done. Now, it was hard to distill 35 years down into one podcast, so I've split this into 2 parts. The first focusing on his access, conservation and safety work, and the second part will be very climbing focused, looking at his role in the development of your indoor climbing walls, the entire coaching scene, and our incredible Real Rock programme. So, strap in and enjoy a journey through time with Kevin Howett.
Now I'm gonna preface this a little and say that I asked you for just a few highlight items so that we could chat about this in the podcast, but I was not expecting the 65-page document of stuff that you gave me.
That's an exaggeration. It's only
I mean, it's not far off. But I mean, for me, it kind of just highlighted how much you've done with Mountaineering Scotland over the years, and how important you've been in creating the Scottish climbing, the Scottish mountaineering scene that we all enjoy now. How much you've been a part of that, and you are a pretty reserved person. You don't shout for much glory all the time.
private.
Yeah,
To be honest.
yeah. But I think with this impact that you've had, it's something that I don't think you get anywhere near enough recognition for. So I hope that this episode goes some way to paying some homage to the work that you've done and how much we all benefit from it. So, like I said, feel free to go off on weird tangents and tell us all the stories. But yeah, how did your life at Mountaineering Scotland start? Like, what was the year? What was the scene? What was your role?
Probably need to give you a bit of background then.
Go.
So I left university down at Exeter in
Yeah.
1979,
Yeah.
a long time ago. And I then bummed around a bit, doing lots of climbing. I did a postgrad certificate in education at Bangor because I thought, well, all the holidays I could go climbing. I was obsessed, basically, with climbing. And that was fine. However, when I finished that course, I continued doing some climbing. I needed to find some more money from somewhere. I needed to live.
Yeah.
Also wrote my car off in Bangor. So I had no money at all. I got done for driving badly,
Strong.
Yeah, that's my car. Anyway, I ended up working part-time, doing bits and pieces for Newcastle LEA, the local authority.
Yeah.
I was a storeman. I worked at LD Mountain Centre, which is a fairly famous outdoor shop in Newcastle, owned by the future owners of Berghaus. I got to know them really well. And I still went climbing, and everything was geared around doing as little work as possible so that I could go climbing, right?
Sounds like you were the right man for the job then.
Yeah, well, potentially. And on top of that, my mum and dad had brought me up to Scotland on all of our holidays since I was 10-year-old. All over the place, right at Skye, when everybody seemed to speak Gaelic, and it was amazing. Just incredible experience. Galloway, Cairngorms, Ben Nevis, all everything. So I had quite a long period of time during my childhood, and then through university coming up in winter, and then doing more climbing, rock climbing. Yeah. After that I was pretty much embedded in Scotland as being the place I wanted to be.
I started coming up climbing here in the summer. I moved up initially for winter climbing, and that's all I did. I was on the Dole, I was climbing with Cubby, and loads of other things, Alan Moist and a whole load of guys, Mark Charlton, and loads of folk from the northeast of England, really, and a few of the Scots, and up in the Fort William area. Had a great time. But, after about 8 years doing this, you do need to get a proper job. By which time I had a girlfriend as well, which made it more important. And Catherine was working down south. She said, you've got to get a full-time job. You've got to get a proper job. And she's the one who saw the advert for the National Officers post at Mountaineering Scotland. And she wrote the application.
So you didn't write it?
No, I didn't write the application. I wasn't that bureaucracy, I didn't want to be involved in all that stuff. I was actually interested in becoming a mountain guide or something like that, or doing something outdoors. And I even really fancied doing work in environmental studies and just generally working outdoors anyway. Anyway, I made the application. I got the flu, and I was called to an interview, and I had the flu. And Catherine drove me up to Edinburgh. I was sitting in the car waiting, and I'm dosed up the eyeballs with, flu stuff. I was drinking whiskey to try and numb everything. And I went to the interview, came back out, I got into the car with Catherine and said, how'd it go? I don't have that job. There's no way I've got that job.
But here we are. Yeah. What year was that?
1989.
1989.
Yeah.
Wow, jeez.
And it was the interview was probably around about September.
Right.
Yeah, something like that. I started in October, 89. But I was second choice.
You were second choice?
Yes. They gave it to somebody else and they said no. Yeah. And that was the second choice.
I remember reading something in one of our old documents. I think it was potentially Bob Reed that said that yes, you were from England, but you were a northerner, so that made you all right.
Yep. I will come on to it, but I'd get a lot of lectures to clubs, and there was one club I was introduced at. Unfortunately, he's not a Scot, but it looks like he's from Northumberland, so he just simply got out of the bed on the wrong side one day and ended up in Scotland.
So what was the role of national officer? Why did that get brought in the first place? And what were you there to do?
Well, I mean, up until then, there were no members of staff. Everything was done by volunteers. There was an executive committee. They were the driving force. They did a lot. But they had a network of other club members helping them. And I think it just got so big that they needed to be able to have somebody working full-time to help. Well, working, because actually they didn't have the money to make it full-time. It was a half-time post. I mean, that's why I went for it, because I was still wanting to climb. I didn't want to spend my whole 5 days a week working.
Being an actual adult?
Yeah.
Jeez.
No way.
No way.
Yeah. Horrible. Plus I had a dog, I got to walk the dog. But anyway, it was a half-time post, and I thought, well, man, fantastic. When I got offered it. Of course, I had to move up, because by that time I was living down in Newcastle, I think, again, doing a bit of work at LD, and Catherine was, she was working with Historic England, or whatever it was called then. So they wanted me to get a place to live in the Central Belt, which was where most of the people were. I couldn't face it. I wanted to be in the country, so I went and stayed with a mate for a little while until we bought a flat in Crieff. We've been here ever since.
Oh, nice. Oh, you've been in Crieff the entire time?
Yeah, I think we bought our first flat here, probably 1990.
Yeah. So what was like the national officer? Obviously, that was brought in at a time where the volunteers needed help with, because things were getting a lot bigger and there was a lot more bureaucracy. Jeez, I can't speak this morning. So, like, what was the job role of the national officer to start with? Because it evolved quite rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons I ended up staying with it is because it evolved every few years. I mean, I did everything. I was representing mountaineering interests, basically, on everything you can think of.
Yeah.
RSPB, National Trust, government, everything. I was SMLTB, as it was back in the day. And I was put into the rep for Scottish Environmental Link at one point, which was an amalgamation of access and conservation bodies, who would then be able to lobby as one to the government. And I was on that for quite a long time. So I did everything. In mountain safety, I was on the TV all the time doing mountain safety stuff and doing access work, dealing with access problems directly, but also, looking at the wider sort of policy issues of access. And just, but you got to remember, it wasn't just me. I had an executive committee.
Yeah.
I was.
You still had the team of volunteers around you.
Yeah, and they were the ones working mainly to produce the policies, which I had input to, but then I would work to those policies.
Yeah.
So it might look like I've been doing an awful lot on my own, but I wasn't. It was all as part of a team.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, even as part of a team, you've had your quite a large hand in a lot of things.
Yeah, there's some ideas have come from me, which I've been quite proud of.
Yeah. So, I mean, most of the time where we've been connected, it's all been through the climbing scene, for obvious reasons. But I want to start chatting about some of the stuff that I don't know too much about. And, I mean, let's kick off with, you mentioned the Scottish Environment Link. So, like the kind of access work that you did, the policy work that you did, the lobbying work that you did. What was the Scottish Environment Link, and what did you do with that?
Yeah, one of the big ones that I remember, because we were representing mountaineering. I was there representing mountaineering interest. So a lot of it was access. At the time, mainly access issues, because there was all sorts of problems of access. I mean, at that point as well, I'd even been confronted by a gamekeeper with a 12-ball, a loaded 12-ball pointed at me, so get off my land, which you don't expect.
No.
So I knew what it was like, and I'd come across some problems. But Link gave us an opportunity to widen that whole thing.
Yeah.
And with the Ramblers were part of that. WWF, RSPB, loads of different organisations.
Oh, it was quite a big organisation.
Yeah, I mean, it's still going.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, Link's still going. And I think it was really important we were part of that sort of grouping, because we had a lot more power than if we were doing stuff individually.
Yeah, for
sure. One of the things I was most interested in, because my background is in biology, zoology degree, was the forestry policy in Scotland at the time by the government was terrible. And we got a working group together at Link to looking at a completely different way of managing our forests and expanding them. It was sort of driven by Alan Watson Featherstone, who set up Trees for Life, which is still going now. A major innovator in sort of re-establishing natural woodlands and forestry, but having people involved in it as well. So, reforesting Scotland, but doing it properly with natural woodlands, with people living and working in it. And that was his focus and still is. And I thought it was brilliant, and I was part of that. And I just remember the whole process was brilliant in producing this paper that came from Link, and we put to the government. We put to the Forestry Commission. And one of the great things about that was Link set up meetings with Forestry Commission, and we had one where they hosted us at Kielder on the borders in Northumberland. And they had a new Director General at the time who thought Kielder Forest was glorious. It's just a huge, great plantation. It's flipping horrible. I used to work in it when I was with the local authority. Horrible place. And we were being told how great this was and look at the great changes we were going to make and everything. And we're all, conservation and access bodies are looking at each other like, this is appalling. And then we sat down and had a brew, and some of the foresters, the older foresters who were there hosting us, and somebody to eat, and they were going, this is not the forestry that we used to do. This is awful. This is just planting trees and cutting them down. He says, we would love to be able to do proper forestry. Yeah. And that was an eye-opener. So after that, where Link arranged a meeting where we would talk to them about how bad their forestry was. So we took them to Galloway. And my point there was that they got these huge plantations all over the hills in Galloway, and you can't get through them. They're not on the top of the hills, but you walk along the ridges and you try and get down. It's impossible. Yeah. It's like wall-to-wall Sitka. And tracks bulldozed right into the middle of this beautiful area. And they totally trashed it. We also had people locally who were saying how bad it was for wildlife. And at the end of it, we thought, well, perhaps we've got there, we actually managed to get through to them. Nah. But it was worth it, and it was a really good educational thing for me to be part of that huge group. Yeah,
and see how the system works and how, with enough people around, change might be able to happen. Yeah. So how did that kind of branch into the early days of your access work then? Yeah, because I know you were part of discussions with access to some of our most beloved climbing areas like Auchenstary Quarry. Yes. And all the bird nesting restrictions and stuff on the East Coast as well. Yeah. I mean,
at the time I was, because I'm really interested in the environment and birds and animals and stuff, so I had an interest from the conservation side as well as the climate side. And when I've been doing my own climbing, I'm very conscious of that. I've walked away when there's been nesting birds on cliffs and stuff, and I've not tried to over-garden stuff, for instance. But I did get to the point where I could write guidance and stuff for nesting birds and climbers. Yeah. And that came about because there was an incident in Ayrshire where 2 guys got arrested for disturbing a peregrine's falcon's nest. Oh, wow. It's quite a good little crag. But there's no information out there. RSPB weren't telling us where the birds were nesting. Yeah. There was no general guidance, nothing. These 2 guys unfortunately got arrested. All their climbing kit got confiscated as evidence. And it was months and months before it came to court. Yeah. And I gave evidence as an expert witness from Mountaineering Scotland.
Oh, you actually had to go to court as well?
Yeah,
Oh, right.
John Donoghue, who was the president at the time, and I went to Ayrshire Crown Court, Sheriff Court, and we're all sitting there waiting, and we're prosecution, so we come second, and we put our statement in and everything, and I talked about the fact that we had no information. We couldn't tell people because the RSP wouldn't let us, all this sort of thing. Anyway, we didn't get to actually get up on the stand because the sheriff kicked it out.
Really?
Yeah, he'd heard so much, and he just stopped and said, "Right, so climbers have got no information from you about or any of this. Well, kick you out." That was it. And the recommendation was that RSPB tell Mountaineering Scotland all about where nesting Schedule 1 birds are. And that's where I wrote the guidance and the policy. And we put it out, and that's the start of the whole bird nesting thing that we've still got going now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Solid judge in that one.
Yeah. It's good.
Really good.
Brilliant. So how long has that been in place for then? When was that?
Oh, God. Probably mid to late 90s.
Oh, wow. So way over 20 years then.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And it's evolved, as more access officers come on board, it's evolved into a traffic light system. And, but it was quite hard work. I mean, as an example, at the time before we got it really properly established, you still had issues to do with, the camel was being bolted up.
Yeah.
And there was a peregrine nests around the corner. And the farmer and the local raptor study group people didn't want climbers there at all during the nesting period. But the farmer's there. Fishermen are all over the place. What difference was it making that we were there?
Yeah.
Just round the corner. In fact, we were away from the nest. So I had to go and have a meeting about that locally. I had a meeting with the farmer and the RSPB, raptor study, SNH, and this all went on, and then we got to an agreement. So I did lots of little agreement things like that.
Yeah.
Based around the general guidance that I'd produced back in the 90s.
How many areas in Scotland have we protected for climbing based on that guidance?
Oh, God.
Because I can think of... So, obviously, Niche Point was roughly the same topic of discussion, was it? St Kilda?
St Kilda's a different one.
St Kilda's a different one?
Yeah,
All right, okay.
That's quite a complex one. Before I got involved with Mountaineering Scotland, I wanted to go out to St Kilda because I'd seen the photos. And I applied to SNH or whoever they were at the time. Countryside Commission, I think, were managing it. And they wouldn't let you. There's bylaws banning you.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew about the place for quite a while. And I knew that some climbers were then allowed to go out because we were doing a bit of research into climbing and nesting birds. The report that was put to them in the end was pretty damning about climbers and their effect on what was a very important conservation site. So they never gave permission again, and I kept trying, and I never got permission to go. Yeah. However, I'd researched quite a lot, in the background into the communities on the island. I'd read the book by Martin, written in the 1600s about the community and how they climbed and everything. And I was intrigued by this whole idea of, the fact that the first ever specified training for rock climbing probably happened there.
Yeah.
The kids traversing the wooden village houses, getting strong for climbing. And they described the things like the thumb
and
classic, and
all the things that Robbie was chatting about in the previous episodes.
Yeah, exactly. So once I got all of this, and this was just after we were getting the access legislation sorted, I put a paper to SNH and to say, look, this is the historical aspect, the community aspect of the islands. You should recognise this. It's from a climbing and historical point of view. It's really important for us, and you should allow climbing. And I got some really snippy replies from people in SNH saying basically get lost. Yeah. But in the end, the access legislation was enacted. They have to change their bylaws, and SNH put the management to NTS, which of course have an open access policy.
Yeah.
So we won in the end.
Nice.
But it was all to do with disturbance of the birds and stuff. The East Point one, you mentioned East Point. East Point wasn't to do with birds.
Was it not?
No, that was access.
Oh, I thought it was. I thought the access was restricted because of the birds.
No.
Oh, right.
Somebody bought the houses and stuff down by the lighthouse on East Point.
Right.
And they put a whopping big sign up at the start of the path from where the car park is saying, private property, get out.
Yeah, that's not going to stand. That's not going to stand.
No. Lime kilns?
Oh, lime kilns?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah. So, the owner of lime kilns didn't like people going into that area of woodland and climbing. Always been against it, I think. So, he strengthened the fences and everything. And the climbers just cut a hole in the fence and went in and climbed.
Mm.
And I think he got so peed off that he plastered grease on all the holes.
Oh,
all
yeah, I
around the
remember
bottom.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, in sort of in reaction to this, somebody wrote on the boulder, "F off, Lord Elgin." And he was so annoyed, absolutely ranting.
It's probably not going to go down well, that one, is it?
Yeah. So I didn't get involved directly with that, but Graham Little, who was the president at the time, he went to see him. I don't think it went down well. But I think, constantly after that, there was they put nesting boxes up on the wall to try and prevent climbing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Screwed in. And, and I had to deal with that. So it gradually, along with local, Beryl Etherland was a local rep, and she lives down there, and she was really instrumental in trying to negotiate and access sort of calmed down. Yeah, that was a good example, I guess.
Was this all happening post access legislation coming in, or was it
Pre and post?
Pre? Oh.
Yeah, it just went on and on over years.
Yeah.
Auchenstary was different again. You mentioned Auchenstary. Somebody decided that they needed to descale all the loose stuff at Auchenstary. So, we got notification of this and said, you need to have a discussion with them about it. So we went to Auchenstary and we talked about it. We met them and had a discussion. And we said, well, actually, there's not an awful lot of loose stuff. Not that seriously loose. Yeah. And we climb all over it. We know what it is. Oh no, it's got to be descaled. We've had this report from Babty Geotech that it's as loose as terrible. It's a danger to humanity type thing. And I said, well, how are you going to do it? So, we have 6 foot length crowbars. I'm not kidding you. The most scientific thing you could think of. Got a big 6 foot length crowbar. We're going to put it behind a block, and if it moves when we're pulling on it, then we get rid of it.
Take it off.
If it stays still, we won't pull it off. And I was looking at it thinking, what the hell? Yeah. And Roger Everett, who's guidebook editor of the SMC Guides at the time, he was with me. And he and I worked quite a bit to try and do this. And we tried our best to stop them destroying the routes, but they did what they did, and we couldn't stop them. They actually made the back of the quarry
totally unclimbable.
Appalling.
Totally unclimbable, that side now. Yeah. That whole section between Return of the King and probably all the way up to Trundle Slab is there's only a couple of routes in there that are climbable. The rest are
they're gone.
Gone.
But anyway, that was some of the work I did.
Yeah.
But then there's loads more.
There's loads. Because in part of your dealings with SNH, not just St Kilda, but out of that came the Land Reform Act. I'm not saying you solely were part of bringing the Land Reform Act.
Oh yeah, it was me.
All of it was you. You were there doing your part for the Land Reform Act and for the Scottish Outdoor Access Code, and you were definitely instrumental when we were going through the whole foot and mouth thing as well. Yeah,
both of those things I think we did really well on.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah, really well.
Yeah. And we showed up other organisations and people in the process. I mean, the access legislation, one of our previous presidents is Lord John Mackenzie, the Earl of Cromarty. So he lives on the east. On the west, of course, is another Mackenzie, part of the same family, who own the Gairloch area. But John has always had this thing about that whole area being, very much wild wilderness, and where his Mackenzies would come from, the Mackenzie clan. He's owned by Dutchman Van Vlissingen. And I think he, like a lot of current Dutchmen who've bought huge areas of land, he thought it was immaculate and wild and natural. Well, of course it's not. It's very managed. But he decided he needed to stop people going in and walking all over it. And he didn't want them lighting fires, didn't want them biking in, all this sort of thing. So he put signs up. And they were beautifully made signs. I mean, he must have spent quite a fortune on these things. And he put them at every access point. So John Mackenzie saw these, was notified of them or something. He went and had a look. And he was outraged. God, bloody hell, I'm not having this. And one of his Mackenzie families, I think it was a cousin or something. She was actually sort of, I think, in a relationship with Van Vlissingen at the time. So he got onto her and said, look, this is unacceptable. We need to have a meeting. So, we're going to have a meeting at Letter U, which I've got to tell you is the most beautiful, beautiful house in Scotland. I mean, if I had several £1 million, I would buy that place. I love it. Anyway, so we organised a meeting and we went along, and I think it was Bob Reid as president at the time. John Mackenzie came. We had Dick Balharry along. Ramblers came. Dave Morris came. Myself. And who am I missing?
Was Nick Kemp there at that time?
Nick, I think, was involved later on.
Right.
But not initial. But anyway, we had numerous meetings spread over about a year and a bit. And gradually just trying to educate him about access, about the whole idea of freedom to roam that we had in Scotland. And in the end, we came up with the Letter U Accord, which people probably don't remember at all. But it was absolutely instrumental. So SNH had been set up by then. Magnus Magnusson, who was...
Good name.
Yeah, he was on the telly quite a lot. He was a TV presenter and stuff. And he, I think, was he the chair, I think, of SNH? And I'm not quite sure how it happened, but he set up, as a result of the Letter U Accord, which we produced. And it was great, me being involved in writing it up and stuff and sending it around everybody and getting comments back and rejigging it and drafted 7. He went through numerous drafts. Magnus Magnusson set up a sort of preliminary access forum within SNH. And that's when the whole discussion started properly.
And when was this? This was obviously pre foot and mouth thing, because I think the foot and mouth was the trigger, the final nail in the coffin.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, because the foot and mouth showed how reasonable we were and how unreasonable landowners were. And it took a long time. It was how many years? It must have been 2 or 3 years or something of discussions and all sorts of stuff going on, meetings outdoors, talking to people, talking to different groups. And it was through that I met people like Alan Blackshaw, who did some incredible background research into the freedom to roam legislation and the Trespass Acts and laws in Scotland and stuff like that. And it was a brilliant time. I really enjoyed them. And Bob Reid was operating a kind of policeman's good guy, bad guy thing in these meetings. So Dave Morris.
Hang on, who was the good guy, who was the bad guy out of that?
Man, I was neither. I just sort of sat there in the background and shoved in a few comments. Bob Reid was a good guy. Right. He was the reasonable one, because he was inner city planner.
Yeah.
You know, he was very reasonable. Dave Morris was the champion of the Ramblers, and a lot of the landowners just decided he was a rampant nutter, you know, and he was a bad cop, basically. They played off each other quite well, actually. I think they worked quite well. But there was one excellent thing we went out on the hill and talked to stalkers and everything. And I was on the Blackmount one day, and I was with the head of the Landowners Federation and the head stalker of the Blackmount Estate. And we're walking around the tops, and we're discussing access and stalking, the problems. And I was saying, well, where are your issues? Where are your problems? And he's saying how they stalked, that they had to go along just below the ridge lines and shot down into the corrie, all this sort of stuff. I said, well, the deer aren't a problem. Well, the walkers aren't a problem as long as they stick to certain routes. So if they go up all the ridges, then it's fine. Oh, yes, well, yeah, it is, but, you know, it still can cause problems. I said, well, just for the stalking period, you know, allow people to walk up any of the ridges. And we sat on the top, having a sandwich, with me arguing against every single thing they came up with. Right? Yeah. And in the end, the guy turned around to me and he said, you know what? You're worse than Dave Morris. I was like, yay!
Oh, that's definitely a claim to fame, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I loved it.
So you were the bad cop. You were the bad cop.
I was the bad cop. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. During all this first period, when I was national officer, I just kept meeting amazing people. You know, people that you heard about in the past and you read about. And Donald Bennett was one. You know, Donald produced some books and guidebooks and stuff. There's a classic book of him that he did on some amazing photos, black and white photos of big cliff climbs all over Scotland, where he painted in the climbers. You can see it's paint. They've actually been drawn on.
Oh, nice.
Brilliant. But he was with the Scottish Rights Away Society at the time.
Right.
He was one of the other people on the Access Forum in the deliberations. But I met Eric Langmuir. I met, you know, Alan Blackshaw, as I said, had meetings with them, and met Chris Bonington and other people down at the BMC. And we were trying to press the BMC to take the same stance as us, to get a completely full on, we didn't call it a right to roam, and we never have, and it never is. Yeah. It's a right of access.
The right to responsible access,
But the BMC they wouldn't do it. Yeah. You know, they felt they were on a hiding to nothing. I think they'd been taking some solicitor's advice about it. So they weren't going to do it. I don't think they really backed us very much in Scotland either over that, which I think was, from my point of view, that's how I felt. And I think they could have done more.
Yeah.
Hey-ho, you know. No, but I mean, there's all sorts of stuff going on, you know. Nevis Partnership.
I was going to say Nevis Partnership as well.
I was kind of elected as the rep. I don't know how it happened, to be honest. It was set up independently of us.
Yeah.
But it was after a whole load of discussions about safety on the Ben. And I remember we had a really big public meeting at the Clachaig all about the safety issues on the Ben. And it was obvious there was a bit of a difference of opinion amongst the climbing community. You know, I would say more than half didn't want any artificial signs and waymarks and all the rest of it on the Ben. But then there was another side who did, to try and prevent all the accidents from the numpties that go up there in bad weather. So, you know, I think because of that, we got invited onto the Nevis Partnership, and I went along. I really enjoyed those meetings.
Yeah.
You know, there was a big group of people from all sorts of different backgrounds, including John Muir Trust, obviously, who owned the top of the Ben, Alcan, who owned the other side of it, the farmer in Glen Nevis, who actually I got to know over the years of living in Glen Nevis. You know, he was quite a character. Yeah, I rather liked him. And then all the different organisations and stuff, and the local authorities, SNH.
Yeah.
So it was great working with all those people, actually. And we did things like raise loads of money for access, for footpath repair. And we did a lot, I think, to...
Well, I mean, the North Face car park came out of that, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
And that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, that took some doing. But we spent ages up there walking the different routes, working out where we could build the path. And I got to admit, I think the path went in, personally, I think it went in the wrong place. You've walked it.
Yeah.
It's quite steep.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think, looking at path design, which came with a footpath truss later on, you wouldn't build that like that now.
No.
Not at all.
No, you definitely wouldn't.
No.
But still, just having that kind of access is huge.
Yeah, it made a massive difference. Yeah.
In all of this work, like you said, you got to meet all these incredible people that have done awesome things for access and conservation and stuff throughout Scotland. But you also worked a lot with the climbing community as a whole, not just the big dogs. And I suppose one of the big topics that you engaged with the community, or helped engage with the community a lot with, you're laughing, you know what I'm going to say, through various consultations and discussions and stuff, the big topic is the bolting.
Do you really want to go into that?
Yeah, I kind of do want to go into that. I think that's one of the biggest changes that's happened in the climbing scene in our climbing existence. Like, that's one of the big hurdles that got overcome. And I know it's not over, but we've got guidelines that came out of a massive nationwide consultation on it, where, I mean, that kind of thing hadn't really happened before within climbing on a particular topic, and it doesn't happen all that often, or hasn't happened all that often since. I think that was a really, really big one.
Yeah, I guess it was, actually. If you look back to it, and I mean, there was sport bolting being done in England, when it first started off. There wasn't a great deal of consultation or, a consensus at the time. And I think the leading guys in Scotland at the time were experimenting. I mean, I was living with Cubby at the time, and he was experimenting with bolting up Criggerbanker on the buckle. I fundamentally disagreed, and I've never done the routes because of it, because I still disagree. For me, that's a mountain crag. Yeah. I know it's close to the road and everything, but I always had this dream that I could go and just take the bolts out and climb it on gear.
That would make for an interesting conversation. Cubby, I've taken your bolts out.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it without getting his say so. To be honest, because I respect Cubby too much. And let's face it, Scottish climbing is Cubby. I mean,
right? Yeah.
I mean, right through the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, he was the man. Yeah. I mean, he was. Got a big respect. It's awesome. But yeah, I mean, the brat, Graham, whatever his name is, he and I didn't get on too well. He was wanting to bolt it up, and he I think was going to just go ahead and bolt it. So Cubby did his route to the right, which was like a bit of a mixture. Yeah. It had pegs, in situ wire, and a bolt, and gear. You had to place gear on it, so it was kind of a hybrid, which was kind of happening as well down in Wales.
Yeah. It's kind of Alpine style. That's kind of did quite a lot and still do.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, the Great Orme stuff. A lot of that initially was sort of hybrid stuff. You'd get routes like Oyster where you had to place gear yourself. There was a peg and then there was one bolt. I think they're probably fully bolted now. I don't know, retro bolted. But yeah, I mean, that was one example of things happening. But it really got kicked off because Duncan McCullum wanted to, because he's a film cameraman.
Yeah.
And he was going to put on an outdoor climbing competition, which they were doing in Europe.
Yeah.
And I think John Dunn was involved in one down south, or was very involved in stuff. So he chose to do a route at Upper Cave Crag, Dunkeld. And so he bolted up like a little diagonal line, and they were going to have this comp, but the word got out, and they were all hell broke loose. And they didn't do the competition. How dare you do a competition on outdoor rock? You shouldn't be. So that was these were starting points, things happening. And then when it really kicked off, there was issues to do with, well, a lot of people didn't agree with it, totally didn't agree with it. Others did, and they thought anywhere was game. And then there was people in the middle. It's like everything.
Yeah.
And I do remember the bolts going in at Polney.
Yeah.
And members of a local club who were quite embedded in the place. They saw it as their local crag. Went and took them out, and then they went back in again, and then they came out again. The bolt war started.
Yeah.
So we realised we had to do something, and this was way back. I mean, this was the early 90s when Graham Little was president. So Graham and I were chatting about what we should do, and we thought, if we put a policy together and then debate it and see how we get on. So I wrote a sort of draft policy, I think, and we organised a public meeting in a pub in Glasgow. Not the best place to have a discussion about bolts, I think.
That was a gamble.
Aye, yeah, looking back on it. It was interesting. And I don't know if there was a consensus looking back on it. I think we thought we got to a consensus that, quarries, anything in a quarry, just do what you like. Yeah. And utterly blank, small crags that aren't in the mountains or sea cliffs. And then we published it. Yeah. But then, of course, things happen, things develop, and then more things get bolted up. And,
and gear changes as well. Like the whole sea cliffs thing was not in because the gear was just corroding, but now I've got titanium bolts.
Yeah. So, but it wasn't just that process. I mean, years later, we had even more discussions. Each time there was an issue arose, we tried to have a public discussion at our AGMs. And all of these led to the final sort of guidance. And the guidance changed over the years. Over 10, 20 years, it changed. And we were trying to be... We were trying to preserve the whole sort of trad ethic and the future of trad climbing at the same time as making room for sport climbing. Yeah. And the vast majority of people out there, I'm sure, thought I was totally anti-bolt. But I wasn't. I've been climbing on bolts since 1977. Yeah. I'm not anti-bolt. And I've been climbing on them ever since. Yeah. I'm embedded in trad. Yeah. And really necky trad. And of course, that was the point where people were thinking, well, there's only a couple of runners on that. We should bolt it up. And I said, no, actually, that is the future of trad climbing. And you look at the E10s and 11s done nowadays. Okay, they're head pointed, which it's cheating, but there again. That's a different story.
That's right. You've discussed that one at length in your last podcast.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, I mean, look at the things they're doing now. Really necky E10s and 11s, and it's great. This is the future of climbing, of trad climbing. Yeah.
No, I find the Bolton discussions really, really interesting because it's not very often that Mountaineering Scotland has seen a problem recognised. It's a problem within the membership, and it's a discussion within the membership, and it's a discussion about how we do our sport. And taking it on, rather than members coming to us and saying, this is what we're thinking, or you guys need to make a decision on this. And I think the way it was all done it's a really strong example of why we have this organisation, why we have this membership, to be able to listen to the voices of the members and preserve what Scottish climbing and mountaineering is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a really, really strong example of that. And like you said, it's evolved over the last 20 years and it's going to probably continue to evolve.
Yeah, I think so. And in any discussion, and I've learned this since 1989, any discussion with any group, government, quangos, whatever, there are extremes at either end. And in a sense, you've got to ignore the extreme, the absolute extreme, because the absolute extreme will never solve anything. You have to look at where can we make compromise, and that's what it's all about, basically.
Yeah.
And, if you look at the guidance now we've got, I think it's actually quite reasonable. It asks people to be sensible. If you want to retrobolt a crag that's been previously led on gear, if it's well protected, then, no, it's not going to happen. You got to accept that it's got a history. If it's utterly unprotectable or death-ridden, and I can think of one in particular that's a good example up near Aviemore, then, if the consensus is there, then I think it's okay to go ahead and do that, And I think people who would be said, "Oh no, you can't do it. These are really necky routes, and and they've got a history." Well, yeah, but they used pegs, which are now rotten and gone, and you can't protect them anymore. What are you going to do? Top rope them all the time? Is that what we do? Because I believe top roping is an absolute sin. Yeah. I know I'm alone in that. It's all right, but for me, it's a sin. I don't do it. But yeah, I mean, what's the crag in Lockinge crag called?
Aviemore. The one up by Aviemore is Farletter.
Farletter. So I did all the routes on Farletter way back, late 90s or something, and they're really prick hard to lead on site. In fact, I don't think many people ever did lead them on site. They were all top rope beforehand. They had pegs placed, which are now rotten. The landing is appalling. I'd hate to fall off and hit the deck. And I scared myself silly, and I like scary routes. And then, of course, somebody decided, right, well, it was Scott Muir actually decided, well, it would make a really good sport venue.
It does?
And and he did it the right way, because Scott's been involved in Mountaineering Scotland from he started climbing, and he knew, basically what to do. So he tried to get a consensus locally. He did it through us as well. And he went to all of the first ascensionists and asked their opinion. And all but one said, we top rope them to death. Nobody that I know, or very few people have led them. You've got my permission to bolt them up. So I thought, well, he's done a really good job there. He's actually done it properly. Yeah. And that's based on what he did at Bennybeg as well. He and I discussed the whole thing with all the local people, the landowner, everyone, local clubs, everybody, to bolt up Bennybeg. And so, when somebody went ahead and then did it, well, step back a bit actually. When that was put out, we said, it's actually fine. Everybody seems happy. We won't touch this one person's route, because you've only done one route on the crag. We'll leave that. It's covered in grass anyway. Nobody does it. He basically said, if you put bolts in, then I'll chop them. Which, of course, put people off. And then some bolts went in, they got chopped. And then we were just sort of waiting to see the tide of change happen, which it has done. It's now all bolted up.
Yeah. And it's a great sport crag.
Yeah. And
actually hard.
Oh yeah, it's still hard climbing. Yeah. But I mean, Scott and I met the Forestry Commission, the local forester, head of department there, and they were saying they don't want people wandering up the top and putting top ropes on all the trees again. They wanted this place contained, and they cut the trees down all around it to put light in to make it nicer. Which is really good of them.
Yeah, really nice of them.
Yeah. So that was a good example. That was a way of using a consensus opinion and going out and chatting to people. And that one extreme person hopefully has seen the light that, they are at the very extreme of their thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, it's a really good example of, just having consultations and discussions with the membership, so still representing the wishes of the membership, still preserving the old ethic of Scottish trad climbing, but still finding spaces for the new sport climbing. Yeah, I think it's a really good example. You've chatted about lots of, and not all of, but lots of the access side of this stuff. But you also had quite a heavy hand in the safety side, climbing safety, mountain safety, drawing up policies. So, and this is when you were working a lot with Graham Little through the mountain safety group.
Yeah, we kind of set that. Well, yeah, there's sort of a lead up to the mountain safety group.
So what was that lead up, and what did that consist of?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, the Scottish Mountain Safety Group. Interesting background history was the Scottish Government gave money to Sport Scotland to help try and diminish the number of accidents and deaths in the hills, in the mountains. And I think Blythe Wright had been, and he was correct in many ways. Blythe Wright was saying how, avalanches were a big issue. They're becoming more of an issue, and there was no avalanche recording system. There wasn't very much research into avalanches. So he managed to secure a substantial grant from government through Sports Council to set up the Avalanche Information Service, which was fine. Yeah, we agree. But it was a large amount of money, and we were getting nothing for mountain safety. And we felt that you needed a two-pronged approach. And we needed research, and we needed an avalanche awareness program, as well as an avalanche information service. So we kind of lobbied Sport Scotland to try and find us money to actually do this. To set something up to do more educational work. And then, it's hard work. And it was Graham Little at the time, and June Ross at the time, I think, was the vice president. And then the ministers would put out warnings, or whatever you want to call them, statements to the press about mountain hazards and warnings that it's going to be terrible and you shouldn't go in the hills and all this. And they were getting worse and worse, these things, really negative. Yeah. And we saw them as a very negative thing, because people out there who don't mountain climb were seeing us as being irresponsible and stupid going out and climbing, which we're not. The vast majority are not. So we really felt that we needed to have some control over this. So we lobbied and lobbied, and finally got the Scottish Mountain Safety Group set up as within the Scottish Sports Council. Yeah. And they were managing it, and they were chairing it, and we would go along as reps. And then it was chaired by Duncan Ross initially, and then Eric Langmuir, which is, everyone in mountaineering terms has got Eric Langmuir's old book. It's brilliant. It was like a Bible. I was just, gobsmacked to meet him and be part of something with him. It was brilliant. And then when Eric sat down, it was Ian Colley later on in the late 90s. But then we got a grant money to help. So we started doing a whole load of different initiatives to help raise awareness about safety issues in the mountain. We did leafleting, we did winter essentials, avalanche, learn to read or get lost leaflets. What else we did? Simple slip, hypothermia, avalanche information, along with the Avalanche Information Service. An interesting one was the whole issue about wearing helmets. Yeah, so one of the things all of this was based on research, mainly through the Mountain Rescue Committee of Scotland and their all their data about rescues and injuries and what have you. And we thought we'll have a look at helmets and the need for helmets. And I think the vast majority of winter climbers, no, you got to put a helmet on.
Yeah.
You'd be really stupid not to. Yeah. You're not going to be a happy person. Plus, it keeps your head warm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a no-brainer. But when we looked at the statistics, there was an awful lot, the vast majority of really bad head injuries were done to walkers. Walking over rough ground in winter, slipping and smashing their head on rocks.
Oh, wow.
And even in summer, there were incidents of people tripping without helmet on and hitting the back of their head there and killing themselves instantly.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
Also, scrambling.
Yeah.
I mean, I think scrambling's way more dangerous than any climb could be.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not a stepping stone to rock climbing.
No.
It's the other way around.
Yeah, you're consistently on loose, chalky ground.
Yeah, with no gear.
With no gear,
Yeah.
no helmet.
And possibly tied to somebody who's equally in a risky situation as you are. So we looked at the stats to do with whether we should say that people wear a helmet or not. And it was quite clear from them, the stats that we had at the time, that actually we should be recommending walkers in winter wear a helmet. But you can imagine trying.
Yeah, there's no way you're going to be able to say that.
Yeah. So we discussed it at length in the SMSG and with members of the team at Glenmore Lodge were part of that group. And they were saying, well, does that mean in summer we have to put helmets on walkers when we're going out on a walking trip with it? Do you have to have people doing that ML with a helmet on? So
I can imagine all the ML trainings out there with their little red helmets on.
I mean, the numbers were relatively small anyway, to be honest. So if you were looking at it objectively, the risk was still quite small. So yeah, we never went ahead with that one. But that was an interesting discussion. Yeah, it was great getting all that detail. And Bob Sharp from the Man Rescue Committee at the time was the one putting all this data together. Yeah. And has done ever since. I mean, he's written a book about the MRCFS as well, just out. And he was an absolute font of knowledge. Incredible. Yeah, that was quite good.
Yeah.
So some of the other things we did were lectures.
Oh, yeah.
And they were interesting. We did a thing called the Scottish Winter Experience Lectures. Right. So when I was climbing before I got the job in the 80s, I was living in Paul Moore's garage. Now, Paul Moore's is a mountain guide based in Tyfirst in Glencoe. Yeah. And we wanted somebody to deliver these things. And Paul had already done stuff at what were at the time funded by the BMC, lectures at the Clackaig every winter. Yeah. So we approached him and said, would you do this series of lectures for us? Can you do a slideshow and everything? I said, I've got some great slides. I can do a really good slideshow. So the whole idea of Paul is, educating people to be safe in the mountains in winter, particularly. He says, yeah. So he sets this thing up, and I go along to the first one, and it was mobbed. Anyway, I remember Paul said, I'm just going to experiment a bit with some of these photos. And I don't know whether, shock tactics are perhaps the way forward or what. Yeah. I said, okay, yeah, go for it, whatever. And I'm sitting there in the back watching. So and he's talking about ice axe breaking, and he was showing you, photographs of the ice, how you break, and he was holding it in the front of the stage, showing people and stuff. But of course, you got to be really careful because you can get this wrong. And then this image popped up, and someone had come off ice axe breaking, and they'd been practicing. Yeah. And they lost control, and the whole length of the ice axe had gone through their upper thigh and was sticking out the other end by their knee. And he literally he put it up for like split second, and I heard everybody in the whole hall go, ah! Because it was like on and off. I think they brought it home. I mean, how dangerous it could be. And And they were really successful. We ran those for years and mobbed with a number of people coming to them. So that was a really good initiative. It was very good. I mean, all these initiatives were really good. And we actually managed to get the ring fence budget, £23,000, which is quite good per year, transferred to us, and we managed the whole thing. And we had to obviously account for it in our reports back to Sports Scotland. That happened in the late 90s. And we wanted a wider group of people on it so that we could have a larger group of people inputting information to us to help us, and also, two-way street. And we could educate them. So we had police, well, obviously mountain rescue. We had local authorities and all sorts of different organisations on it. And it became the Scottish Mountain Safety Forum, because it was much more of a forum. And by that time anyway, we had a mountain safety officer in post as well.
Right. Who was?
The first one was Roger Wild.
Oh, Roger Wild, yeah.
So Roger, basically, the SMSF would get together. I think he would be at the meeting and keep the minutes and everything. Yeah. And then, of course, whatever initiatives came out of it, he would be the one going ahead and doing the initiatives. I'm pretty sure Kate Ross, who was one of our first vice presidents, she chaired that organisation for quite a while. And I think the government still give us a grant towards that because they see the worth of it, the educational aspect of it, which is really good. So it was great being right at the beginning and the part of that and seeing it develop over the years.
Yeah. And the impact that's had as well. Like, there's been a lot of seismic changes and decisions made based on that research, the research they've done and the discussions they've had. And,
definitely. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned earlier that, before we had a mountain safety officer, I was basically safety officer. And I did a lot of TV. One of the best ones we did, I think, was we wanted to say, what kind of equipment you needed to take on the hill in winter. And if you were in a group of a few of you doing winter hill walking, because we hadn't really concentrated on that quite so much. And Cairngorms can be a vicious place in the winter. So we went up on the hill with Hazel Irvine, who's a presenter for, I think for ITV, actually, not BBC. And she's still on TV. I saw her last night, actually, doing snooker. Anyway. So we got up there and it was blowing a hoolie. It was really like proper winter conditions. Yeah. And there was a poor cameraman there getting blown apart by the wind and it was snowing. And we said, right, these conditions, you need, if something goes wrong, you need to get into a shelter. And Pete's brought a group shelter, which is basically a huge sheet. And you put it right over, you sit on it and bring it right over the top, and you'd be amazed at how warm, So we said, we got Hazel in, Pete and me, and we had the cameraman looking through a little gap. And they were in there talking about, how to keep warm. And I said, the most important thing that you need to do in situations like this, because it can get really cold, even in this. I mean, you're out of the blizzard, but it can be very cold. It can get down to -10, -15 or whatever. The important thing is shared bodily warmth. And his level looked at me, went, huh?
You could maybe have worded that one slightly less creepy.
Yeah, I think it came across as really creepy.
So, I mean, that's kind of branching into your communication outside of the organisation as well. And part of that, while you're doing all of the safety work and access work and conservation work and policy work, you also started the newsletter and the magazine. Yeah. Like, as if you didn't have enough to do.
Right from the start, I was involved in sort of not putting the newsletter together, but by printing it off on a printer and sending it out to the clubs. Because it only went to club secretaries. And we used to add a whole load of maybe 20, 30 copies and hoping they would distribute them at their meetings so members could see the news. And they were just printed on a sheet of paper. And that was like that for years.
Yeah.
But as we grew, we realised we really needed to get the information out to members directly. Yeah, so one of our very early vice secretary was Evelyn McNichol. And she was teaching me how to use a computer because I had never used a computer in my life. So I would write and handwrite the newsletter information and stuff, give it to her, she'd type it all up with me helping.
Yes.
And then we print it off and send it out. But we needed to do a little bit more than that, really. And so we thought, well, we'll try and see if we can get a publisher and get somebody in as editor of the magazine, because I was doing everything still at the time. We put a thing out there saying, if anybody's interested and would like to come and do a presentation for us and say what they would do, please, come in. So I was on that committee. There was the president, vice president, various other people, and myself, and we were interviewing them. And one of them was Peter Evans, who was climber editor at the time, or climber and hill walker, I think. I don't know, I can't remember. And Peter was the one who came up with the name, Scottish Mountaineer. That was in his presentation. So that was him coming up with an idea. And he punted it to us, and we all thought, this is great. It's a really good idea.
Yeah.
But then we looked at the finances, and we couldn't afford to employ him. It was a quite difficult situation. But Peter was really good. He gave us a column in Climber magazine, so we could get more information out. And he gave us quite a lot of advice, and he was really good, actually. But of course, it just fell to me to do it. But luckily, I mean, we had Mike Dales in post as access officer, and Roger was doing the safety. So there was a bit of space in my work to do this. So it's obvious to take it over. So I became editor of the mag.
And how long were you editor for?
Oh God, I'm not sure actually.
Do you know how many copies you put out?
No.
I'm sure we can figure that out. I'm going to figure that out. After this, I'm going to go and figure that out.
It's got to be, I don't know, 12 years?
Yeah.
Something like that.
But I mean, now we've just put out the 100th issue.
Yeah.
Look what you've started.
Yeah. And it was small to start with.
Yeah.
I mean, when we decided to have it published, we approached several different companies to publish it.
Yeah.
And we actually ended up going with this company down near Manchester. They only did 3 issues for us, although we had a contract with them for 2 years. The CEO changed and those things changed. But I went down and saw where they were doing it. And I chatted to the guy who was page setting for us. I couldn't believe it. They did loads of titles, a lot of motorbike titles and things like that, and some porn titles as well. We didn't realize this when we engaged them, and I went down there and they introduced me to the page setter that I was going to be using, and I sat down next to him, and there's all this porn stuff everywhere. It's like, oh my God.
Oh, brilliant.
Anyway, they only did 3. You can imagine a mix-up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't have gone down well.
No. All the old school mountaineers having to go into the supermarket and look at the top shelf for the Scottish Mountaineer. Jeez. Yeah, I don't think that would have gone down well.
Yeah, it was quite an interesting experience. Anyway, we went out to somebody else and we got really good pro sports promotions in Glasgow. Were brilliant.
Yeah.
And worked with them for quite a while. And I suppose we used the name Scottish Mountaineer. That came from Peter. But a lot of the stuff in there, that came from me as an editor, trying to find things to be of interest to our members. So I got an awful lot of regular things happening. I got, Irvin Butterfield, who'd been helping me out since I started.
Yeah.
he was doing regular stuff for us, a whole series of different things, actually. Some of the other ones, I got John Allen to do stuff about general mountaineering and scrambling, all sorts of things like that. Ian Evans, amazing mountain photographer, he did a whole series about how to take mountain photos and the best way to do things, and the techniques and technicality of it all. David Jarman, doing stuff, looking at different ways of walking up hills, rather than just take, you got the guidebook, you've got a way that you walk up that's in the guide, the Munros or whatever, the Corbetts. He would look at alternative routes and say how good they were. Hamish Brown did stuff for us as well. It was really good. And then in climbing terms, I wanted to set up something that I thought the outdoor mags in the country were pretty much ignoring Scotland. Paid lip service to it because they're all published and edited by people down south. So I started Climb Scotland series, and I got Es Trezida actually did a few for us.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I know. Interesting, because he was quite an active climber at the time and climbing pretty hard. It was really, really, really interesting to have him do it. But Guy Robertson did a lot, and Dave McLeod did a lot, and they shared the winter stuff and the summer stuff together. And I got John Watson, who'd just come on board with his very first bouldering book, and he started a whole series about bouldering around Scotland, which went down really well. And we also had set up a really interesting initiative this was part of the 25th anniversary, to pick a route that's been done since the 1800s. The best route of each year, put them all together in a row, and then get people to go out, sign up to one, and go and repeat it in modern style, right? And then write about it. And it was called the Climb Through History. It was part of our 25th celebrations. And the initiative came from Graham Nichol. And it was brilliant. I've still got all the info. We didn't get every single route signed up to and climbed in the time that we needed it. But it'd be great to resurrect it. I think
that'd be good to try and resurrect. That could be your retirement mission.
Yeah. Some of them are appallingly bad. Terrible, covered in grass. But they're quite interesting. So that's where Climb Scotland came from. And
really? Wow, that was the birthplace.
That's where the title came from.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. There was a period when there was a couple of members that said there's far too much climbing in the magazine and not enough hill walking. And I sat down and I did an assessment of how many pages over a whole year. And it was roughly the same. I mean, in total, I guess it was more on the walking side, but only just. So there was quite a lot of climbing, but that's because of my background and my interest. But anyway, they decided that we needed to reduce the amount of climbing information in there, particularly that about competitions, which our members, very few of them are interested in.
Don't care about.
Yeah, exactly. Which is fair enough. So by this time, the magazine was being produced by Herald and Times, and they were able to put it as a digital version as well. So it cost nothing to have a separate e-active digital section, purely about all the things that were going on in the climbing world. So, I mean, it covered everything. It had loads of competition stuff for the kids. We had articles by the kids doing it.
I remember I wrote a few.
Yeah, you did.
I wrote a few back in the day.
It had loads of stuff about, I got people like Julian Lyons to write about deepwater soloing, and Robbie Phillips. He wrote several bits for it as well. Loads of really good stuff in there. And it grew and grew and grew. It only lasted 2 years before I stepped back and Neil Reid took over.
Neil took over.
It carried on for a few issues after that, but not so many. I didn't have the time to do it. I was engrossed in coaching development by then.
Oh, well, come on.
Yeah. But I mean, I truly believe that I think there is a place for a climbing e-active magazine separate to the Scottish Mountaineer, because there's so much going on.
Well, I think we all owe Kevin a huge debt of gratitude for all of that work, which I'm sure has benefited everyone who enjoys the outdoors in Scotland. Look out for part 2, where we get into Kevin's favourite topic, climbing. Oh, and in the meantime, do your buddy checks.